What if I told you that one of the most influential books in ancient Judaism was deliberately erased from your Bible? That somewhere in the shadows of religious history lies a text so controversial, so filled with dangerous revelations about fallen angels and giants, that religious authorities have spent centuries trying to make you forget it ever existed? Tonight we're diving into the forbidden Book of Enoch, a text that was once considered scripture by early Christians, quoted by the apostles themselves, yet mysteriously vanished from the biblical canon. But here's what they don't want you to know. This wasn't just some obscure religious writing that faded into history. This was a book that shaped Jewish and Christian thought for centuries, influenced the New Testament writers, and contained revelations so disturbing that the church had to make a choice: include it and risk everything, or bury it forever. But first, if you're ready to uncover more hidden truths that challenge everything you thought you knew about biblical history and forbidden texts, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what we're about to reveal is just the beginning of a much deeper mystery. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why certain books made it into the Bible while others didn't? Why 66 books were deemed sacred while hundreds of others were cast aside as heretical? The answer isn't as simple as divine inspiration or historical accuracy. It's about power, control, and the deliberate shaping of religious thought by human institutions with very human agendas. The Book of Enoch stands as perhaps the most dramatic example of this ecclesiastical censorship. Here was a text that was revered by ancient Jews, quoted by early Christians, referenced by biblical authors, yet it completely vanished from mainstream Christianity. Why? What was so dangerous about Enoch's revelations that they had to be erased from religious memory? To understand the magnitude of this suppression, you need to grasp just how influential the Book of Enoch actually was in the ancient world. We're not talking about some fringe religious text that a handful of mystics read in secret. This was mainstream religious literature in Second Temple Judaism, the period between the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem and its destruction by the Romans in 70 CE. During this crucial period in Jewish history, when many of the ideas that would later influence Christianity were taking shape, the Book of Enoch was considered authoritative scripture by many Jewish communities. It was quoted, referenced, and treated with the same reverence as the books that would eventually make it into the Hebrew Bible. The Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in the caves near Qumran contained more copies of Enoch than almost any other text except the Torah itself. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. The influence of Enoch didn't stop with Judaism. Early Christian writers embraced it with enthusiasm. The letter of Jude in the New Testament directly quotes from the Book of Enoch, treating it as prophetic scripture. Early church fathers like Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, and Origen referenced it extensively in their writings. Some even argued that it deserved a place in the biblical canon. Yet somehow, despite this widespread acceptance and influence, the Book of Enoch was systematically excluded from the official Bible. It disappeared from Jewish synagogues, vanished from Christian churches, and was lost to the Western world for over 1,000 years. This wasn't accidental neglect. This was deliberate suppression on a massive scale. The story of how this happened reveals everything about the politics of religious authority and the lengths to which institutions will go to control the narrative of faith. But to understand why Enoch had to be suppressed, we need to understand what it actually contains. And trust me, once you hear what this forbidden book reveals, you'll understand why religious authorities were so desperate to keep it hidden. The Book of Enoch opens with a premise that would make any religious institution nervous. It claims to contain the revelations of Enoch, the mysterious figure from Genesis who walked with God and was taken up to heaven without dying. But this isn't the brief, cryptic mention we find in the canonical Bible. This is a detailed, elaborate account of Enoch's journey through the heavenly realms and the shocking secrets he discovered there. According to the Book of Enoch, during his supernatural journey, Enoch witnessed events that completely transform our understanding of the story told in Genesis. He saw the rebellion of the Watchers, a group of angels sent to observe humanity who instead became corrupted by human women. He watched as these fallen angels taught forbidden knowledge to mankind, introducing warfare, cosmetics, astrology, and other arts that God had intended to keep hidden. But the most disturbing revelation in Enoch's account concerns the offspring of these unions between angels and human women. The text describes the birth of the Nephilim, giants of enormous size and supernatural power who dominated the earth before the flood. These weren't just tall humans. According to Enoch, these giants were abominations that consumed everything in their path, eventually turning to cannibalism and drinking the blood of humans. Now, you might think this sounds like ancient mythology, fantastical stories with no bearing on serious religious thought. But here's what makes the Book of Enoch so significant. This wasn't just entertaining fiction. This was presented as divinely revealed truth about the origin of evil in the world, the reason for the flood, and the cosmic battle between good and evil that shapes all of human history. The theological implications were staggering. If Enoch's account was true, then evil didn't originate with human disobedience in the Garden of Eden. It originated with angelic rebellion and supernatural corruption of the human bloodline. The flood wasn't just God's judgment on human wickedness, it was a cosmic reset, an attempt to cleanse the earth of supernatural contamination. This understanding of evil as having supernatural origins rather than purely human ones would profoundly influence Jewish thought during the Second Temple period. It explains why this era saw such an explosion of interest in angels, demons, and cosmic warfare. It provides the background for the apocalyptic literature that flourished during this time, and it sets the stage for the New Testament's understanding of spiritual warfare and the cosmic dimensions of Christ's mission. But here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. As Christianity evolved from a Jewish sect into a distinct religion, as it spread throughout the Roman Empire and began to establish institutional structures, the Book of Enoch became increasingly problematic for church leaders. The reasons weren't primarily theological, though theology certainly played a role. The real issue was authority. The Book of Enoch represented a form of religious knowledge that couldn't be controlled by institutional Christianity. It claimed direct divine revelation that bypassed human religious authorities. It offered explanations for evil and suffering that didn't require priestly interpretation. It provided believers with a cosmic perspective that made earthly religious hierarchies seem less important. Even more threatening was the book's treatment of women and sexuality. While the canonical Bible tends to blame women for the fall of humanity, the Book of Enoch places the blame squarely on rebellious angels. It suggests that the corruption of humanity came from supernatural seduction rather than human weakness. This perspective could have led to very different attitudes toward women and sexuality in Christian culture. The Church Fathers, who would eventually determine the biblical canon, faced a difficult choice. They could embrace the Book of Enoch and deal with its theological complications and challenges to institutional authority, or they could reject it and lose one of the most influential and widely accepted texts in Jewish and early Christian literature. They chose rejection, but they couldn't simply ignore the book's influence or pretend it had never existed. Instead, they developed sophisticated arguments for why it shouldn't be considered canonical scripture. They questioned its authorship, arguing that it couldn't really have been written by the biblical Enoch. They criticized its theological content, claiming it contradicted other biblical teachings. They pointed to its exclusion from the Hebrew Bible as evidence that it wasn't truly inspired. These arguments weren't entirely without merit. The Book of Enoch, as we have it today, is clearly a composite work written by multiple authors over several centuries. The earliest sections probably date to the 3rd century before Christ, with later additions continuing into the 1st century of the Common Era. It shows clear signs of editorial activity and development over time. The theological content also raised legitimate questions. Some sections of Enoch seem to contradict established biblical teachings about angels, salvation, and the afterlife. The book's elaborate angelology and demonology went far beyond anything found in the canonical scriptures. Its detailed descriptions of heavenly realms and cosmic geography couldn't be verified through other biblical sources. But here's what's fascinating about these objections. The same criticisms could be applied to many books that did make it into the biblical canon. Questions of authorship, theological consistency, and historical accuracy weren't applied uniformly across all ancient religious texts. The exclusion of Enoch seems to have been as much about institutional preferences as objective scholarly criteria. The process of canonical selection reveals the very human nature of what we often think of as divinely guided decisions. The church councils that determined the biblical canon weren't just discerning divine will. They were making strategic choices about which texts would serve their institutional interests and theological agendas. The Book of Enoch, with its emphasis on direct revelation, its challenging theological content, and its potential to inspire independent religious thinking, simply didn't fit the model of Christianity that was emerging in the 4th and 5th centuries. It represented roads not taken, possibilities that were deliberately foreclosed, yet the book didn't disappear entirely. It survived in Ethiopia, where the Orthodox Church maintained it as canonical scripture. It was preserved in fragmentary form in various ancient languages, and it continued to influence Jewish mystical traditions and esoteric Christian movements throughout the medieval period. The rediscovery of complete manuscripts of the Book of Enoch in the 18th and 19th centuries created a sensation in biblical scholarship. Suddenly, scholars had access to a text that had shaped ancient Jewish and Christian thought but had been lost to the West for over a millennium. They could see direct connections between Enoch and New Testament writings that had been invisible for centuries. This rediscovery forced a reconsideration of everything scholars thought they knew about the development of Jewish and Christian thought. It revealed the extent to which early Christianity had been influenced by apocalyptic and mystical traditions that later institutional Christianity had suppressed. It showed how different the religious landscape of the ancient world had been from what survived in official church teaching. But perhaps most importantly, the recovery of the Book of Enoch revealed the artificial nature of the boundaries that had been drawn around biblical literature. It showed that the canon wasn't a natural or inevitable collection of the most inspired texts, but a carefully curated selection that reflected particular theological and institutional priorities. This raises profound questions about religious authority and the nature of sacred texts. If the Book of Enoch was influential enough to shape the authors of the New Testament, if it was considered scripture by many early Christians, if it contains insights into the cosmic dimensions of good and evil that aren't found elsewhere, then what does its exclusion tell us about the reliability of canonical decisions? The implications extend far beyond academic theology. They touch on fundamental questions about how religious truth is determined, who has the authority to define orthodoxy, and whether institutional Christianity preserved or distorted the original message of Jesus and the apostles. The Book of Enoch stands as a monument to the paths not taken in Christian development. It represents a more mystical, apocalyptic, and cosmically oriented Christianity that might have emerged if different choices had been made in the early centuries of church history. It preserves insights into the supernatural dimensions of reality that were systematically edited out of mainstream Christian teaching. But the story of Enoch's suppression also reveals something else. It shows the persistence of suppressed truth, the way that hidden knowledge has a tendency to resurface even after centuries of burial. The book that religious authorities tried to erase has returned to challenge their carefully constructed narratives. The text they declared dangerous and heretical is now available to anyone with an internet connection. This creates both opportunities and challenges for contemporary believers. On one hand, access to previously suppressed texts like the Book of Enoch allows for a more complete understanding of the religious traditions that shaped Christianity. It provides insights into questions and concerns that animated ancient believers but were edited out of official church teaching. On the other hand, engaging with these suppressed texts requires a level of spiritual and intellectual maturity that goes beyond simple acceptance of institutional authority. It demands the ability to think critically about religious claims while remaining open to spiritual truth. It requires the courage to question established doctrines while maintaining genuine faith. The Book of Enoch doesn't provide easy answers to these challenges. Instead, it complicates our understanding of Christian origins and forces us to grapple with questions that institutional Christianity preferred to avoid. But perhaps that's exactly what we need. Perhaps the real danger wasn't in the book itself, but in the impulse to suppress it. What happens when you open a book that was considered too dangerous for human minds to comprehend? What do you discover when you read the actual words that shaped the apostles themselves, yet were deemed too threatening for ordinary believers? The answer lies in the specific revelations that the Book of Enoch contains, revelations so detailed and disturbing that they couldn't be allowed to survive in mainstream Christianity. Let's start with what Enoch claimed to witness during his supernatural journey. According to the text, he was taken up into the heavenly realms where he observed events that had been hidden from human understanding since the beginning of time. But this wasn't a peaceful tour of paradise. What Enoch saw was a cosmic war, a rebellion that had torn apart the very fabric of creation itself. The book describes how 200 angels, known as the Watchers, descended to Mount Hermon with a sinister purpose. These weren't random acts of rebellion. According to Enoch, these angels formed a conspiracy, bound themselves with mutual oaths, and deliberately chose to corrupt humanity. Their leader, Semyaza, convinced the others to take human wives and reveal forbidden knowledge to mankind. But here's where the story becomes truly disturbing. The unions between these fallen angels and human women didn't produce normal children. They produced giants of enormous size and supernatural strength. The Book of Enoch provides specific measurements claiming these Nephilim grew to heights of 3,000 cubits. That's over 4,000 feet tall, making them literally the size of mountains. These weren't just large humans with unusual strength. According to Enoch's account, these giants possessed supernatural abilities inherited from their angelic fathers. They could manipulate the elements, command lesser spirits, and possessed knowledge of cosmic secrets that gave them godlike power over ordinary humans. They established themselves as rulers over mankind, demanding worship and tribute. The text describes how these giants consumed everything in their path. They devoured all the food that humans could produce, forcing mankind into starvation. When that wasn't enough, they began eating humans themselves. Eventually, they turned on each other, creating a cannibalistic nightmare that covered the earth in blood and violence. But the corruption went even deeper than physical violence. The fallen angels began teaching forbidden knowledge to humanity. Azazel taught men how to make weapons of war, introducing violence and conflict on a scale never before imagined. Other angels taught women the arts of cosmetics and jewelry, which the text presents as vanity and deception. Still others revealed the secrets of astrology, divination, and magic, giving humans access to supernatural powers they weren't meant to possess. The Book of Enoch presents this as the true origin of all human evil. War, vanity, occult practices, and supernatural corruption all trace back to the rebellion of the Watchers. Humanity's fall wasn't just about eating forbidden fruit in a garden. It was about angelic beings deliberately corrupting the human race through genetic manipulation and forbidden knowledge. This understanding completely transforms how we read the flood narrative in Genesis. In the canonical Bible, the flood appears to be God's response to human wickedness that had grown beyond acceptable limits. But in the Book of Enoch, the flood becomes something far more dramatic. It's a cosmic intervention designed to cleanse the earth of supernatural contamination. According to Enoch, God didn't just decide to destroy humanity because they were behaving badly. The entire genetic integrity of the human race had been compromised by angelic intervention. The giants were reproducing and spreading their corrupted bloodline throughout the earth. If God hadn't intervened, humanity as He created it would have ceased to exist entirely. The flood, therefore, wasn't punishment. It was rescue. It was God's desperate attempt to preserve pure human genetics by saving Noah and his family, who apparently hadn't been corrupted by angelic intervention. The text suggests that Noah was chosen not just for his righteousness, but because his bloodline remained genetically pure. But here's what makes this account truly chilling. According to the Book of Enoch, the flood didn't solve the problem permanently. The spirits of the dead giants became demons that continue to torment humanity. The knowledge taught by the fallen angels couldn't be completely erased, and some of the watchers themselves were merely imprisoned rather than destroyed, awaiting a final judgment that hasn't yet come. This creates a cosmic narrative that extends far beyond biblical history into the present day. If Enoch's account is true, then the spiritual warfare described in the New Testament isn't just metaphorical. It's the continuation of an actual war that began before the flood and continues to rage today. The implications for understanding Jesus and his mission become staggering. In this cosmic context, Christ isn't just a moral teacher or even a sacrifice for human sin. He's a warrior in the cosmic battle against forces that have been corrupting humanity since the dawn of time. His miracles aren't just signs of divine power, they're victories in an ongoing war against the spiritual descendants of the Watchers. This understanding explains why the New Testament writers were so concerned with demons, spiritual warfare, and cosmic powers. They weren't inventing new theological concepts. They were drawing on a rich tradition of apocalyptic thought that saw all of human history as the battleground between supernatural forces of good and evil. The Book of Enoch also provides detailed descriptions of Enoch's tour through the various levels of heaven and hell. He describes seeing the places where the fallen angels are imprisoned, awaiting final judgment. He witnesses the abodes of the righteous dead and the torments of the wicked. He receives prophecies about the end times that make the Book of Revelation seem tame by comparison. These visions aren't just mystical speculation. They're presented as revealed truth about the structure of spiritual reality. Enoch claims to have seen the very throne room of God, to have witnessed the angelic hierarchies that govern creation, to have received direct instruction about the cosmic laws that govern both heaven and earth. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of Enoch's revelations concerns the final judgment. The book describes a coming day when the Messiah will appear to judge not just humanity, but the fallen angels themselves. It speaks of a new heaven and new earth that will be established after the current corrupt system is destroyed. It promises that the righteous will receive supernatural bodies and rule alongside the Messiah in the eternal kingdom. These prophecies provided hope for oppressed Jewish communities during the difficult centuries before Christ's birth. They offered cosmic perspective on suffering and persecution, suggesting that current injustices were temporary aberrations that would be corrected in God's final judgment. They promised that the righteous would ultimately triumph over the supernatural forces that had corrupted the world. The influence of these ideas on early Christianity cannot be overstated. The concept of spiritual warfare, the expectation of a messianic kingdom, the belief in bodily resurrection, the understanding of demons as fallen angels, all of these central Christian doctrines show clear influence from the Book of Enoch. Yet as Christianity became institutionalized, these cosmic and apocalyptic dimensions were gradually de-emphasized in favor of more manageable theological formulations. The Church preferred to focus on individual salvation rather than cosmic warfare, on moral improvement rather than supernatural transformation, on institutional authority rather than direct revelation. The Book of Enoch represented everything that institutional Christianity found difficult to control. It offered believers direct access to cosmic truth that didn't require priestly mediation. It provided explanations for evil and suffering that bypassed official church teaching. It promised supernatural transformation that made earthly religious hierarchies seem less significant. The process of suppressing Enoch reveals the systematic way in which institutional Christianity eliminated challenging voices from its tradition. This wasn't just about one book. It was part of a broader campaign to create a more manageable version of Christianity, one that would serve institutional interests rather than inspire independent spiritual seeking. The techniques used to discredit Enoch became the template for suppressing other challenging texts. Questions about authorship, claims of theological inconsistency, appeals to established authority, all of these methods were refined in the campaign against Enochic literature and then applied to other texts that threatened institutional control. But the suppression wasn't entirely successful. The Book of Enoch survived in Ethiopia, where it remained canonical scripture in the Orthodox Church. It influenced Jewish mystical traditions that preserved many of its insights in different forms. It continued to inspire esoteric Christian movements throughout the medieval period. The rediscovery of complete manuscripts in the modern era has allowed scholars to reconstruct the enormous influence this text had on ancient Jewish and Christian thought. They can now see connections between Enochic traditions and New Testament writings that had been invisible for centuries. They can understand how different early Christianity might have been if these cosmic and apocalyptic dimensions had been preserved. This recovery of suppressed knowledge forces us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about Christian origins and development. It reveals the extent to which our understanding of early Christianity has been shaped by institutional decisions rather than historical evidence. It shows how different the religious landscape of the ancient world was from what survived in official church teaching. The implications extend far beyond academic theology. They touch on questions about religious authority, the nature of revelation, and the relationship between institutional Christianity and the original message of Jesus and the apostles. They challenge us to consider whether the Christianity we inherited represents a faithful preservation of apostolic teaching or a systematic distortion of it. The Book of Enoch doesn't provide easy answers to these questions. Instead, it complicates our understanding in ways that force deeper thinking about the nature of faith, truth, and religious authority. It reveals possibilities that were deliberately foreclosed and asks whether those decisions served the cause of truth or the interests of institutional power. But perhaps most importantly, the story of Enoch's suppression reveals the persistent power of hidden truth. The book that religious authorities tried to erase has returned to challenge their carefully constructed narratives. The text they declared dangerous and heretical is now accessible to anyone willing to engage with its challenging content. This creates both opportunities and responsibilities for contemporary believers. The opportunity to understand their religious tradition more completely, to see connections and influences that were deliberately obscured, to engage with questions and concerns that animated ancient believers but were edited out of official church teaching. But it also creates the responsibility to think critically about religious claims while remaining open to spiritual truth. It demands the courage to question established doctrines while maintaining genuine faith. It requires the maturity to engage with complex and challenging ideas without losing one's spiritual bearings. The Book of Enoch stands as a testament to the roads not taken in Christian development. It represents a more mystical, apocalyptic, and cosmically oriented Christianity that might have emerged if different choices had been made in the early centuries of church history. It preserves insights into the supernatural dimensions of reality that were systematically edited out of mainstream Christian teaching. The question that remains is whether we're ready to engage with these suppressed dimensions of our religious heritage. Whether we have the courage to explore territories that institutional Christianity declared off limits. Whether we're prepared to grapple with cosmic perspectives that might transform our understanding of faith itself. Because the Book of Enoch doesn't just challenge our understanding of early Christian history. It challenges our understanding of the spiritual warfare that continues to rage around us. The cosmic dimensions of good and evil that shape our world. The supernatural realities that exist beyond the material realm we take for granted. The question becomes even more urgent when you realize that the suppression of Enoch wasn't just about removing one controversial book from circulation. It was about fundamentally altering how humanity understands its place in a cosmic struggle that has been raging since before recorded history began. Consider what happens when you remove the Enochic worldview from religious consciousness. Suddenly, evil becomes a purely human problem. Sin originates with individual moral failures rather than supernatural corruption of the human race. Spiritual warfare becomes metaphorical rather than literal. The cosmic dimensions of Christ's mission disappear, replaced by a more manageable narrative about personal salvation and moral improvement. This wasn't accidental. The church fathers who orchestrated Enoch's exclusion understood exactly what they were doing. They were creating a version of Christianity that could be controlled, managed, and institutionalized. A religion that would produce compliant believers rather than cosmic warriors. a faith that would serve earthly hierarchies rather than challenge supernatural powers. But here's what they couldn't eliminate entirely. The influence of Enochic thought had already penetrated too deeply into Jewish and Christian consciousness. You can see its fingerprints throughout the New Testament, even though the book itself was being systematically suppressed. When Jesus speaks of binding the strong man, he's using language that comes directly from Enochic traditions about binding the fallen watchers. When Paul writes about principalities and powers in heavenly places, he's drawing on the cosmic geography that Enoch described in detail. When Revelation describes a war in heaven, it's continuing a narrative that began in the Book of Enoch. The Apostle Peter's reference to angels who sinned and were cast into hell comes straight from Enochic literature. Jude's mention of angels who left their proper dwelling place is a direct echo of the Watcher's rebellion. Even Jesus' genealogy in Luke, which traces his lineage back through Seth rather than Cain, reflects Enochic concerns about genetic purity and the corruption of human bloodlines. These weren't casual references or literary borrowings. The New Testament authors were writing for audiences who understood the cosmic framework that Enoch provided. They assumed their readers knew about the Watchers, the giants, the forbidden knowledge, and the ongoing spiritual war. They were building on a foundation of apocalyptic thought that took these supernatural realities for granted. Yet within a few centuries, this entire worldview had been systematically eliminated from mainstream Christianity. The cosmic drama was reduced to personal morality. The supernatural warfare became purely symbolic. The apocalyptic expectations were pushed into the distant future or relegated to metaphorical interpretation. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process that took place over several centuries as Christianity evolved from a Jewish apocalyptic movement into a Greco-Roman religious institution. Each step in this evolution moved further away from the cosmic perspective that had shaped the original apostolic community. The process accelerated dramatically after Constantine's conversion and the establishment of Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. Suddenly, the Church had to serve the interests of imperial power rather than challenge earthly authorities. An apocalyptic faith that expected the imminent overthrow of all human kingdoms became politically inconvenient. The Book of Enoch, with its detailed prophecies about the destruction of corrupt earthly rulers and the establishment of a divine kingdom, represented everything that imperial Christianity needed to suppress. It couldn't be allowed to inspire believers who might take its political implications too seriously. The theological arguments against Enoch were developed to serve these political necessities. The Church Fathers weren't just concerned about doctrinal purity, they were concerned about social stability and institutional survival. A religion that promised the imminent destruction of all earthly powers wasn't compatible with serving those same powers. This explains why the exclusion of Enoch coincided with the broader suppression of apocalyptic Christianity. The expectation of an imminent divine intervention was replaced by emphasis on the institutional church as the kingdom of God on earth. The cosmic warfare was internalized as a battle between virtue and vice within individual souls. The supernatural dimensions of reality were relegated to the afterlife. safely removed from present political concerns. But the cost of this transformation was enormous. Christianity lost its cosmic perspective, its understanding of the supernatural forces that shape human history, its expectation of divine intervention in earthly affairs. It became a religion of personal salvation rather than cosmic transformation, of moral improvement rather than supernatural warfare, of institutional loyalty rather than apocalyptic hope. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church stands as a living reminder of what was lost. In Ethiopia, the Book of Enoch remained canonical scripture, continuing to shape religious consciousness in ways that Western Christianity abandoned centuries ago. Ethiopian believers never lost their understanding of the cosmic dimensions of spiritual warfare, the reality of angelic and demonic intervention in human affairs, the expectation of divine judgment on corrupt earthly powers. This preservation of Enochic Christianity in Ethiopia wasn't accidental. The Ethiopian Church developed independently from Roman Christianity, maintaining connections to Jewish apocalyptic traditions that were suppressed elsewhere. They never experienced the political pressures that forced other Christian communities to abandon their cosmic worldview. The result is a form of Christianity that looks dramatically different from what developed in Europe and America. Ethiopian Orthodox believers take angels and demons seriously as active participants in daily life. They expect divine intervention in earthly affairs. They maintain apocalyptic hope for the transformation of corrupt worldly systems. They preserve a cosmic perspective that makes Western Christianity seem spiritually impoverished by comparison. The rediscovery of the Book of Enoch in the modern era has forced Western scholars to confront what was lost when this text was suppressed. They can now see how different Christianity might have been if the cosmic dimensions of faith had been preserved rather than eliminated. Modern archaeology and manuscript discoveries have confirmed much of what scholars suspected about Enochic influence on early Christianity. The Dead Sea Scrolls revealed the enormous popularity of Enochic literature in first-century Judaism. Fragmentary texts in multiple languages showed how widely these traditions were known throughout the ancient world. Scholarly analysis demonstrated the extensive influence of Enochic thought on New Testament writings. Yet despite this mountain of evidence, most Christian denominations continue to ignore or marginalize the Book of Enoch. Seminary students might learn about its historical significance, but they're rarely encouraged to engage seriously with its theological content. Pastors might reference it occasionally in academic contexts, but they don't preach from it or treat it as authoritative scripture. This ongoing marginalization reveals how deeply the suppression of Enoch has shaped modern Christianity. Even when the historical evidence clearly demonstrates its importance, institutional Christianity remains reluctant to embrace a text that challenges its comfortable theological boundaries. The reasons for this continued resistance go beyond simple tradition or canonical authority. The Book of Enoch represents a form of Christianity that would be difficult for modern institutions to control or manage. It offers believers direct access to cosmic truth that doesn't require priestly mediation. It provides explanations for evil and suffering that bypass official church teaching. It promises supernatural transformation that makes earthly religious hierarchies seem less significant. Perhaps most threatening of all, the Book of Enoch treats ordinary believers as potential recipients of direct divine revelation. Enoch himself wasn't a priest or religious professional. He was a man who walked with God and received extraordinary visions as a result of that relationship. The text suggests that such experiences are possible for anyone willing to pursue genuine spiritual intimacy with the divine. This democratization of religious experience terrifies institutional Christianity just as much today as it did in the 4th century. Churches built on professional clergy, theological expertise, and institutional authority have difficulty accommodating the possibility that God might speak directly to ordinary believers, bypassing official channels entirely. The Book of Enoch also challenges the comfortable distinction between natural and supernatural that characterizes much of modern Christianity. Contemporary believers often treat miracles as rare exceptions to natural law. Spiritual warfare is largely metaphorical, and angelic intervention is something that happened in biblical times but not today. Enochic Christianity recognizes no such boundaries. The supernatural isn't separate from the natural. It's the deeper reality that underlies and shapes all natural phenomena. Spiritual warfare isn't metaphorical. It's the actual conflict that determines the course of human history. Angels and demons aren't ancient myths. They're active participants in contemporary events. This worldview requires a level of spiritual sophistication that many modern believers find uncomfortable. It demands the ability to perceive spiritual realities that can't be verified through scientific methods. It requires faith in cosmic dimensions of existence that go far beyond what can be proven through rational argument. Yet for those willing to embrace this expanded understanding of reality, the Book of Enoch offers insights that can transform their entire approach to faith. It provides context for understanding the spiritual dimensions of current events, the cosmic significance of personal choices, the supernatural resources available to believers who understand their place in the ongoing cosmic drama. The text doesn't just describe ancient events. It provides a framework for understanding how the rebellion of the Watchers continues to influence contemporary culture. The forbidden knowledge they revealed to humanity didn't disappear with the flood. It was preserved and continues to corrupt human civilization through occult practices, technological manipulation, and spiritual deception. Modern developments in genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and consciousness manipulation can be understood as continuations of the same forbidden knowledge that the Watchers revealed to antediluvian humanity. The current erosion of natural human relationships, the increasing prevalence of supernatural phenomena in popular culture, the growing acceptance of practices that were once considered occult. All of these trends make sense within an Enochic framework. The book also provides hope for believers who feel overwhelmed by the apparent triumph of evil in the world. It reminds them that current events are part of a cosmic drama that has already been determined in God's favor. The fallen angels and their human allies may appear to be winning, but their ultimate defeat is certain. The righteous may suffer temporarily, but their vindication is guaranteed. This cosmic perspective can sustain faith through the darkest periods of history. It explains why evil often seems to prosper while righteousness suffers. It provides context for understanding persecution, spiritual attack, and the apparent silence of God in times of crisis. It reminds believers that they're part of a story much larger than their individual circumstances. But engaging seriously with the Book of Enoch also requires confronting uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil, the role of supernatural forces in human affairs, and the reliability of institutional religious authority. It challenges believers to think more deeply about the spiritual dimensions of reality while maintaining their commitment to revealed truth. The text forces honest examination of whether the Christianity we've inherited represents a faithful preservation of apostolic teaching or a systematic distortion designed to serve institutional interests. It raises questions about which voices were silenced in the formation of Christian orthodoxy, and whether those voices might have preserved essential truths that official Christianity abandoned. These aren't just academic questions. They have practical implications for how believers understand their spiritual lives, their relationship with religious institutions, and their responsibility to seek truth, even when it challenges comfortable assumptions. The Book of Enoch stands as a monument to suppressed knowledge, a reminder that religious truth is more complex and challenging than institutional Christianity often admits. It represents roads not taken, possibilities that were deliberately foreclosed, insights that were systematically eliminated from mainstream religious consciousness. Yet the text has survived, preserved by communities that recognized its value despite official condemnation. It has returned to challenge the narratives that were constructed in its absence, to complicate the simple stories that institutional Christianity prefers to tell about its origins and development. The question that remains is whether contemporary believers have the courage to engage with this challenging material, to wrestle with its implications for their understanding of faith, to consider the possibility that essential truths were lost when Enoch was erased from the biblical canon. Because the Book of Enoch doesn't just offer historical information about ancient religious thought. It offers a different way of understanding the spiritual warfare that continues to rage around us, the cosmic dimensions of good and evil that shape our world, the supernatural realities that exist beyond the material realm we often mistake for ultimate reality. The fallen angels described in Enoch's visions didn't disappear when the book was suppressed. The cosmic warfare didn't end when institutional Christianity stopped talking about it. The spiritual forces that corrupted antediluvian humanity continue their work today, using new methods but pursuing the same ancient agenda of deceiving and destroying humanity. Understanding this reality requires the kind of cosmic perspective that the Book of Enoch provides. It requires recognition that current events have spiritual dimensions that can't be understood through purely material analysis. It requires faith in supernatural realities that challenge the naturalistic assumptions of modern culture. But it also requires wisdom to distinguish between authentic spiritual discernment and paranoid conspiracy thinking, between genuine revelation and human speculation, between cosmic truth and religious manipulation. The Book of Enoch itself warns about the dangers of forbidden knowledge and the seductive power of spiritual deception. This balance between openness to supernatural reality and critical discernment represents one of the greatest challenges facing contemporary believers. How do you embrace the cosmic dimensions of faith without losing your intellectual integrity? How do you take spiritual warfare seriously without becoming consumed by fear or paranoia? How do you seek hidden truth without falling prey to spiritual deception? The Book of Enoch doesn't provide easy answers to these questions. Instead, it complicates our understanding in ways that force deeper thinking about the nature of reality, truth, and spiritual discernment. It challenges us to expand our conception of what's possible while maintaining our commitment to what's true. The implications of what we've discovered force us to confront a disturbing possibility. What if the systematic exclusion of the Book of Enoch wasn't just about theological disagreements or questions of authorship? What if it represented something far more calculated? A deliberate attempt to reshape Christianity itself by eliminating the very foundation that gave the faith its cosmic significance. To understand the true magnitude of this suppression, we need to examine exactly what happened during those crucial centuries when Christianity transformed from a Jewish apocalyptic movement into a Roman institutional religion. This wasn't a gradual, organic evolution. This was a systematic campaign to eliminate specific elements of Christian thought that were deemed incompatible with the new direction church leadership wanted to pursue. The process began in earnest during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, as Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire and encountered Greco-Roman philosophical traditions that viewed the material world very differently than Jewish apocalyptic thought. Greek philosophy tended to spiritualize religious concepts, treating them as metaphorical representations of inner truths, rather than literal descriptions of cosmic realities. This philosophical influence created pressure to reinterpret the supernatural elements of Christian faith in ways that would be more acceptable to educated Roman audiences. The cosmic warfare described in Enochic literature seemed primitive and mythological to minds trained in Greek rational thought. The detailed descriptions of angelic hierarchies and demonic powers appeared superstitious to people who preferred philosophical abstractions. Church leaders faced a choice. They could maintain the Jewish apocalyptic worldview that had shaped early Christianity, risking intellectual respectability among Roman elites. Or they could adapt Christian teaching to Greco-Roman sensibilities, gaining cultural acceptance but losing essential elements of the original faith. The decision to suppress the Book of Enoch was part of this broader adaptive strategy. The text represented everything about early Christianity that seemed embarrassing to church leaders who wanted to present their faith as sophisticated and philosophically respectable. Its detailed descriptions of giant offspring from angelic unions appeared mythological. Its cosmic geography seemed primitive. Its expectations of imminent divine intervention in earthly affairs seemed naive. But eliminating Enoch required more than simply removing it from circulation. The book's influence on early Christian thought was so pervasive that references to it appeared throughout the New Testament and early Christian literature. church leaders had to develop sophisticated theological arguments to explain why texts that quoted Enoch approvingly should still be considered authoritative while Enoch itself should be rejected. The solution they developed involved a careful distinction between inspiration and quotation. They argued that New Testament authors could quote from non-canonical sources without endorsing their authority, just as Paul quoted pagan poets without treating their works as scripture. This allowed them to preserve the canonical status of books like Jude, while rejecting the Enochic traditions those books clearly endorsed. This theological maneuvering required increasingly complex explanations, as scholars recognized more and more connections between Enochic literature and canonical texts. The influence wasn't limited to occasional quotations. Entire theological frameworks in the New Testament showed clear dependence on Enochic thought patterns. The concept of Jesus as the Son of Man, one of the most important Christological titles in the Gospels, comes directly from the Book of Enoch. The text describes a messianic figure called the Son of Man who will judge the world and establish an eternal kingdom. This isn't a casual borrowing of terminology, it's adoption of an entire theological framework. Similarly, the New Testament's understanding of demons as fallen angels comes from Enochic traditions. Earlier Jewish thought had various explanations for the origin of evil spirits, but the specific identification of demons with rebellious angels appears first in Enochic literature and then becomes standard in Christian teaching. The Book of Revelation's cosmic warfare imagery, its description of angels and demons battling in heavenly realms, its expectation of divine judgment on corrupt earthly powers. All of these central elements of Christian apocalyptic hope show clear dependence on Enochic traditions. Yet somehow church leaders expected believers to embrace these ideas while rejecting the very texts that had developed them. This contradiction created ongoing tensions throughout the early centuries of Christian development. Believers who took the cosmic elements of their faith seriously naturally gravitated toward Enochic literature, since it provided the most detailed and coherent explanation of the supernatural realities their scriptures described. But church leaders increasingly discouraged such interests, preferring to focus on more manageable theological topics. The result was a gradual hollowing out of Christianity's cosmic dimensions. The supernatural warfare became increasingly metaphorical. The expectation of divine intervention was pushed into the distant future. The detailed understanding of angelic and demonic hierarchies was replaced by vague acknowledgments that such beings existed but weren't proper subjects for serious theological reflection. This process of decosmicization accelerated dramatically after Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine. Suddenly, the church had to serve the interests of earthly power rather than challenge them. A faith that expected the imminent overthrow of all human kingdoms became politically inconvenient when those kingdoms were now officially Christian. The Book of Enoch posed particular problems in this new context. Its detailed prophecies about divine judgment on corrupt rulers couldn't be safely preached when the church depended on imperial patronage. Its promise that the righteous would inherit supernatural authority over earthly kingdoms threatened existing power structures. Its expectation of cosmic transformation made compromise with worldly authorities seem like betrayal of divine purposes. Church leaders resolved these tensions by systematically eliminating the sources that created them. Enochic literature was gradually removed from circulation, replaced by more manageable theological formulations that didn't challenge earthly powers or inspire revolutionary expectations. The cosmic Christianity of the apostolic age was replaced by an institutional Christianity that could coexist comfortably with Roman imperial culture. Yet the suppression wasn't entirely successful. The influence of Enochic thought had penetrated too deeply into Christian consciousness to be completely eliminated. It survived in various forms throughout the medieval period, inspiring mystical movements, apocalyptic expectations, and esoteric traditions that institutional Christianity couldn't fully control. The Cathars in southern France preserved Enochic understandings of cosmic dualism and the corruption of the material world. The Joachimites developed apocalyptic expectations based on Enochic chronologies. Various mystical traditions maintained awareness of angelic hierarchies and demonic powers that official theology preferred to ignore. These movements were systematically suppressed by institutional Christianity, often through violent persecution. The Albigensian Crusade wiped out the Cathars. The Inquisition eliminated other groups that preserved dangerous knowledge. The Church used all available means to ensure that alternative interpretations of Christian truth couldn't challenge official orthodoxy. But the knowledge itself proved impossible to eliminate entirely. It survived in hidden traditions, encoded in symbolic literature, preserved in communities that understood the importance of maintaining cosmic perspectives on Christian faith. The Book of Enoch itself survived in Ethiopia, where the Orthodox Church never abandoned its canonical status. The Ethiopian preservation of Enochic Christianity provides a fascinating window into what Western Christianity might have looked like if different choices had been made during those crucial early centuries. Ethiopian believers maintained the cosmic worldview that Western Christianity abandoned. They continued to take angels and demons seriously as active participants in human affairs. They preserved apocalyptic expectations that institutional Christianity had learned to suppress. This parallel development of Christianity in isolation from Roman influences demonstrates that the path taken by Western Christianity wasn't inevitable. Different choices were possible. The cosmic dimensions of faith could have been preserved alongside institutional development. The supernatural elements of Christian teaching didn't have to be sacrificed for intellectual respectability or political convenience. The rediscovery of the Book of Enoch in the modern era has forced Western scholars to confront what was lost when this alternative path was abandoned. They can now see the enormous gap between the cosmic Christianity of the apostolic age and the domesticated version that emerged from the Roman imperial church. Modern archaeological discoveries have confirmed the central role that Enochic literature played in first-century Judaism and early Christianity. The Dead Sea Scrolls contained more copies of Enochic texts than almost any other non-biblical literature. Fragmentary manuscripts in multiple languages demonstrate how widely these traditions were known throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. Yet despite this overwhelming evidence of historical importance, most Christian denominations continue to treat the Book of Enoch as an interesting historical curiosity rather than a source of authentic spiritual insight. Seminary curricula might mention it in passing, but they don't engage seriously with its theological content. Pastors might reference it occasionally in academic contexts, but they don't preach from it or encourage their congregations to study it. This ongoing marginalization reveals how completely the ancient suppression succeeded in reshaping Christian consciousness. Even when presented with clear evidence of the text's importance, modern believers often feel uncomfortable engaging with material that challenges their familiar theological boundaries. The discomfort isn't just about unfamiliar ideas. It's about confronting the possibility that essential elements of Christian truth were deliberately eliminated from the tradition they inherited. If the Book of Enoch really was as influential as the evidence suggests, if it really did shape the thinking of the apostles themselves, then its exclusion represents a catastrophic loss that has impoverished Christian understanding for centuries. This realization forces uncomfortable questions about religious authority and the reliability of institutional decisions. If church leaders could make such a massive error in excluding Enoch, what other mistakes might they have made? If political and cultural pressures could influence canonical decisions, how can believers trust that the Bible they received represents an accurate preservation of divine revelation? These questions become even more troubling when you consider the methods used to suppress Enochic Christianity. This wasn't just scholarly disagreement about textual authenticity or theological interpretation. This was systematic censorship designed to eliminate perspectives that threatened institutional interests. The Church Fathers who orchestrated this suppression weren't primarily concerned with preserving doctrinal purity. They were concerned with creating a version of Christianity that could serve the needs of Roman imperial culture. They needed a religion that would support earthly authority rather than challenge it, that would encourage compliance rather than inspire revolution, that would focus on individual salvation rather than cosmic transformation. The Book of Enoch represented everything they needed to eliminate. Its detailed prophecies about divine judgment on corrupt earthly powers couldn't be safely preached in a Christianized empire. Its promise of supernatural authority for the righteous threatened existing hierarchies. Its cosmic perspective made compromise with worldly systems seem like spiritual treason. The success of this suppression campaign demonstrates the enormous power that religious institutions wield in shaping human consciousness. By controlling which texts believers could access, which ideas they could explore, which questions they could ask, the Church effectively determined how entire civilizations would understand the nature of reality itself. This power was used to create a version of Christianity that served institutional interests rather than spiritual truth. The cosmic drama was reduced to personal morality. The supernatural warfare was internalized as psychological conflict. The apocalyptic hope was relegated to the distant future or metaphorical interpretation. The result was a Christianity that could coexist comfortably with any earthly power structure, that made no inconvenient demands on political authorities, that inspired personal virtue without challenging systemic corruption. It was a domesticated religion that posed no threat to the established order. But this domestication came at an enormous cost. Christianity lost its prophetic edge, its cosmic perspective, its revolutionary potential. It became a religion of accommodation rather than transformation, of comfort rather than challenge, of institutional loyalty rather than divine truth. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church stands as a living reminder of what was lost. Their preservation of the Book of Enoch allowed them to maintain perspectives that Western Christianity abandoned centuries ago. They never lost their understanding of the cosmic dimensions of spiritual warfare, their expectation of divine intervention in earthly affairs, their recognition of the supernatural forces that shape human history. This preservation wasn't accidental. The Ethiopian Church developed in isolation from the political pressures that forced other Christian communities to compromise their cosmic worldview. They never had to choose between spiritual truth and imperial favor because they operated in a different political context entirely. The result is a form of Christianity that looks dramatically different from what developed in Europe and America. Ethiopian believers take seriously the reality of angelic and demonic intervention in daily life. They maintain apocalyptic expectations that Western Christianity learned to suppress. They preserve cosmic perspectives that make institutional Christianity seem spiritually impoverished by comparison. The contrast is particularly striking when you examine how Ethiopian Christians understand current events. They don't separate the political from the spiritual, the natural from the supernatural, the earthly from the cosmic. They see all of human history as part of an ongoing spiritual drama, in which angelic and demonic forces actively participate. This integrated worldview allows them to make sense of developments that leave Western Christians confused and discouraged. They understand persecution as part of the cosmic warfare described in Enochic literature. They interpret natural disasters as signs of supernatural conflict. They see political corruption as evidence of demonic influence rather than simply human weakness. Most importantly, they maintain hope in the midst of apparent chaos because they understand current events within the cosmic framework that Enoch provides. They know that the forces of evil may appear to be winning, but their ultimate defeat is certain. They recognize that the righteous may suffer temporarily, but their vindication is guaranteed by divine decree. This cosmic perspective provides spiritual resources that Western Christianity has largely lost. It explains why evil often prospers while righteousness suffers. It offers context for understanding persecution, spiritual attack, and apparent divine silence. It reminds believers that they're part of a story much larger than their individual circumstances, but engaging seriously with this cosmic perspective requires confronting realities that modern Christianity prefers to avoid. It demands recognition that spiritual warfare is more than metaphor, that supernatural forces actively influence human affairs, that the material world we experience is shaped by invisible realities most people never consider. This expanded understanding of reality challenges the naturalistic assumptions that dominate contemporary culture. It requires faith in dimensions of existence that can't be verified through scientific methods. It demands spiritual discernment that goes beyond rational analysis. Yet for those willing to embrace this cosmic worldview, the Book of Enoch offers insights that can transform their entire approach to faith. It provides context for understanding the spiritual dimensions of current events, the supernatural significance of moral choices, the cosmic implications of personal decisions. The text reveals that individual believers aren't just trying to live moral lives in a neutral universe. They're active participants in a cosmic drama that has been unfolding since before human history began. Their choices have supernatural consequences that extend far beyond their immediate circumstances. This understanding can be simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it reveals the cosmic significance of every human life, the supernatural resources available to those who align themselves with divine purposes, the certainty of ultimate victory for those who choose the right side in the cosmic conflict. Terrifying because it reveals the reality of supernatural opposition, the presence of forces that actively seek human destruction, the ongoing nature of spiritual warfare that makes neutrality impossible. You're either aligned with the forces of light or serving the purposes of darkness, whether you realize it or not. The Book of Enoch doesn't allow for comfortable middle positions or spiritual indifference. It presents reality as fundamentally divided between supernatural forces of good and evil, with every human being forced to choose sides in a conflict that will determine their eternal destiny. This cosmic either-or challenges the relativistic assumptions of modern culture. It insists that absolute truth exists, that moral choices have objective consequences, that some spiritual paths lead to liberation while others lead to destruction. It demands the kind of spiritual seriousness that contemporary Christianity often seems to discourage. Yet this seriousness is balanced by profound hope. The cosmic conflict described in Enoch isn't an evenly matched struggle with uncertain outcome. The forces of light have already won the decisive victory. The apparent triumph of evil is temporary deception that will be exposed when divine judgment finally arrives. This certainty of ultimate victory provides strength for enduring present difficulties. It explains why the righteous can maintain hope despite overwhelming opposition. It offers perspective that transforms suffering from meaningless tragedy into meaningful participation in cosmic redemption. The Book of Enoch reminds believers that they are not alone in their struggles against evil. They're supported by angelic armies, guided by divine wisdom, sustained by supernatural power that can overcome any earthly opposition. The forces arrayed against them may seem overwhelming, but they're already defeated enemies whose time is running out. This cosmic support system requires activation through faith, prayer, and spiritual discipline. The supernatural resources described in Enoch aren't automatically available to casual believers. They require the kind of serious spiritual commitment that institutional Christianity often seems reluctant to demand. But for those willing to pay the price, the rewards are extraordinary. Access to divine wisdom that transcends human understanding. Supernatural protection that can preserve life in impossible circumstances. Spiritual authority that can bind demonic powers and release divine blessing. These aren't just ancient promises for biblical heroes. According to Enochic teaching, They're available to any believer who develops the kind of intimate relationship with God that Enoch himself experienced. The same divine power that translated Enoch to heaven without death can transform contemporary believers into agents of cosmic redemption. This democratization of supernatural experience terrifies institutional Christianity just as much today as it did in the 4th century. Churches built on professional clergy and institutional authority have difficulty accommodating the possibility that ordinary believers might receive direct divine revelation, perform supernatural miracles, or exercise spiritual authority that bypasses official channels. The Book of Enoch suggests that such experiences aren't just possible but necessary for believers who want to fulfill their cosmic destiny. It presents Enoch as a model for what every believer can become through genuine spiritual seeking. It promises that the same divine secrets revealed to ancient prophets remain available to contemporary seekers who pursue them with sufficient dedication. This promise both inspires and challenges modern believers. It offers hope that spiritual life can be far more dynamic and transformative than institutional Christianity often suggests. But it also demands the kind of serious commitment that goes far beyond casual church attendance or nominal religious belief. The question that emerges from engaging with the Book of Enoch isn't whether its specific details are historically accurate or theologically correct. The question is whether contemporary believers are ready to embrace the cosmic dimensions of faith that it represents, to take seriously the supernatural realities it describes, to accept the responsibilities that come with understanding their true place in the ongoing drama of cosmic redemption. Because the Book of Enoch doesn't just offer information about ancient religious thought. It offers a roadmap for spiritual transformation that could revolutionize how believers understand their relationship with God, their purpose in life, and their role in the cosmic conflict between good and evil. The suppression of this roadmap represents one of the greatest tragedies in Christian history. Not because the Book of Enoch is perfect or infallible, but because its elimination impoverished Christian understanding in ways that continue to limit spiritual growth and supernatural effectiveness today. The cosmic Christianity it represents offers resources that institutional Christianity desperately needs but seems reluctant to embrace. The recovery of Enochic Christianity presents modern believers with challenges that go far beyond academic curiosity about ancient texts. When you begin to seriously engage with the cosmic worldview that Enoch represents, you're not just learning historical information. You're confronting a completely different way of understanding reality itself. One that demands fundamental changes in how you approach spiritual life. Consider what happens when you start taking the Book of Enoch's teachings about the Watchers seriously. Suddenly, the spiritual warfare that Paul describes in Ephesians isn't just metaphorical language about personal temptation. It becomes literal description of ongoing conflict between supernatural intelligences that actively influence human affairs. The principalities and powers aren't abstract concepts. They're actual entities with specific agendas, hierarchical organizations, and strategic plans for corrupting humanity. This shift in understanding transforms how you interpret current events. Political corruption isn't just human weakness, it's evidence of demonic influence operating through human agents. Cultural trends that promote violence, sexuality without boundaries, or occult practices aren't just social phenomena. They're manifestations of the same forbidden knowledge that the Watchers originally taught to antediluvian humanity. The entertainment industry's obsession with supernatural themes takes on sinister significance when viewed through an Enochic lens. Movies and television shows that glorify demonic powers, promote occult practices, or present fallen angels as sympathetic figures aren't just fantasy entertainment. They're propaganda designed to make humanity comfortable with the very forces that seek their destruction. Even seemingly innocent developments in technology and science become suspect when you understand the Enochic narrative. The push toward genetic modification, artificial intelligence, and human enhancement technologies echoes the forbidden knowledge that the Watchers revealed before the flood. The same angelic beings who taught humanity how to corrupt the natural order are continuing their work through modern scientific research. This perspective can quickly become overwhelming for believers who've been raised in the sanitized version of Christianity that emerged after Enoch's suppression. They're suddenly confronted with a reality that's far more dangerous, far more complex, and far more demanding than anything their religious education prepared them to handle. The temptation is either to retreat into comfortable denial or to become consumed by paranoid fear of supernatural forces that seem to be everywhere. Neither response serves the cause of spiritual truth or practical effectiveness in cosmic warfare. The Book of Enoch itself provides guidance for navigating these challenges. The text doesn't present the cosmic conflict as a reason for fear or despair. Instead, it offers hope based on divine sovereignty and ultimate victory. The fallen angels may be powerful, but they're already defeated enemies whose time is limited. The Nephilim may have dominated the antediluvian world, but they were destroyed by the flood and their spirits bound until the final judgment. Most importantly, the text reveals that faithful believers have access to supernatural resources that can overcome any opposition. The same divine power that enabled Enoch to walk with God, receive cosmic revelations, and be translated to heaven without death remains available to contemporary believers who pursue genuine spiritual intimacy. But accessing these resources requires more than casual faith or nominal religious commitment. Enoch's example suggests that cosmic authority comes through radical dedication to divine purposes, willingness to separate from corrupt worldly systems, and persistent seeking of direct divine encounter. This level of spiritual commitment challenges the comfortable Christianity that many believers prefer. It demands choices that separate you from mainstream culture, practices that seem extreme to casual observers, and priorities that put spiritual reality above material concerns. The process begins with serious study of suppressed spiritual knowledge, not just the Book of Enoch, but the entire tradition of apocalyptic literature that institutional Christianity marginalized. The books of Jubilees, 4th Ezra, the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, and other texts that preserved cosmic perspectives on spiritual reality. This study must be balanced with rigorous spiritual discipline. Prayer that goes beyond casual requests to include serious intercession against demonic powers. Fasting that breaks the hold of material concerns and opens spiritual perception. meditation that allows divine wisdom to penetrate consciousness clouded by worldly distractions. The goal isn't just intellectual understanding of cosmic realities, but practical effectiveness in spiritual warfare. The ability to discern demonic influence in personal circumstances, family relationships, and cultural trends. The authority to bind evil spirits and release divine blessing. The wisdom to navigate the spiritual dimensions of daily life without being deceived or overwhelmed. This practical application of Enochic spirituality requires community with others who share similar commitments. Isolated individuals attempting to engage cosmic forces alone often become unbalanced or ineffective. The spiritual warfare described in Enoch is corporate as much as individual, requiring coordinated action by believers who understand their role in the larger cosmic drama. Finding such community presents significant challenges in contemporary Christianity. Most churches are uncomfortable with the level of supernatural engagement that Enochic spirituality requires. Pastors trained in seminaries that marginalized apocalyptic literature often lack the theological framework necessary to guide believers into cosmic spiritual practices. The result is that serious seekers of Enochic Christianity often find themselves operating on the margins of institutional Christianity, gathering in small groups or connecting through networks that exist outside official church structures. This marginalization mirrors the experience of believers throughout history who preserved suppressed spiritual knowledge despite official disapproval. Yet these marginal communities often demonstrate spiritual vitality that makes mainstream Christianity seem spiritually impoverished by comparison. They take seriously the reality of angelic and demonic intervention in human affairs. They expect supernatural manifestations of divine power. They maintain apocalyptic hope that transforms their understanding of current events and future possibilities. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church provides the most visible example of what institutionalized Enochic Christianity looks like. Their preservation of the Book of Enoch as canonical scripture allowed them to maintain cosmic perspectives that other Christian traditions abandoned. Ethiopian believers operate with theological frameworks that take supernatural reality seriously, while maintaining ecclesiastical structures that channel spiritual authority effectively. Studying Ethiopian Orthodox spirituality reveals possibilities that Western Christianity lost when it suppressed Enochic literature. Their liturgical practices incorporate awareness of angelic hierarchies. Their theological education includes serious study of apocalyptic texts. Their pastoral care addresses demonic oppression as readily as psychological problems. Most significantly, Ethiopian Orthodox believers maintain expectation of divine intervention that transforms how they approach both personal challenges and social problems. They don't separate the spiritual from the political, the supernatural from the natural, the cosmic from the earthly. They understand all of human experience as part of the ongoing drama between forces of light and darkness. This integrated worldview provides resources for hope and action that Western Christianity often lacks. When Ethiopian believers face persecution, they understand it within the cosmic framework that Enoch provides. When they encounter natural disasters, they interpret them as signs of supernatural conflict. When they see political corruption, they recognize demonic influence rather than simply human weakness. This cosmic perspective doesn't lead to passive resignation or otherworldly escapism. Instead, it inspires active engagement based on confidence in ultimate divine victory. Ethiopian Orthodox believers work for social justice because they understand their efforts as participation in cosmic redemption. They resist evil because they know their opposition serves divine purposes that will ultimately triumph. This model of engaged cosmic spirituality challenges both the otherworldly mysticism and the secular activism that often characterize contemporary Christianity. It demonstrates that taking supernatural reality seriously doesn't require withdrawal from worldly concerns, but rather engagement with those concerns from a cosmic perspective. The implications extend far beyond individual spiritual development. If significant numbers of believers began to embrace the cosmic worldview that the Book of Enoch represents, it could transform Christianity's impact on contemporary culture. Churches that take spiritual warfare seriously become more effective at addressing the supernatural dimensions of social problems. Believers who understand their cosmic significance become more committed to divine purposes that transcend personal comfort. This transformation wouldn't happen automatically or without resistance. The forces that originally suppressed Enochic Christianity remain active today, working through both secular culture and institutional religion to prevent believers from discovering their cosmic identity and supernatural authority. The entertainment industry continues to promote distorted versions of supernatural reality that make authentic spiritual warfare seem like fantasy or superstition. Academic theology remains largely committed to naturalistic assumptions that explain away the cosmic dimensions of biblical revelation. Popular Christianity often reduces spiritual warfare to psychological concepts that eliminate any real supernatural content. These influences create a cultural environment that makes serious engagement with Enochic spirituality seem extreme or dangerous. Believers who begin to take cosmic realities seriously often face ridicule from secular friends, concern from family members, and suspicion from church leaders who prefer more manageable versions of Christian faith. The pressure to conform to acceptable spiritual boundaries is enormous. The temptation is to retreat into safer theological territory that doesn't challenge cultural assumptions or demand radical lifestyle changes. Many believers who initially embrace cosmic perspectives eventually compromise with more conventional approaches that require less commitment and provoke less opposition. Yet those who persist in pursuing authentic Enochic spirituality often discover resources that make the challenges worthwhile. Access to divine wisdom that provides clarity in confusing circumstances, supernatural protection that preserves them through dangerous situations, spiritual authority that enables them to help others find freedom from demonic oppression. These benefits aren't just personal rewards for spiritual dedication. They're tools for advancing divine purposes in a world that desperately needs authentic spiritual leadership. Believers who understand their cosmic identity become agents of divine transformation rather than passive recipients of religious comfort. The Book of Enoch suggests that this transformation of human consciousness was always part of God's plan for redemption. The cosmic conflict between good and evil isn't just background context for individual salvation. It's the arena in which redeemed humanity learns to exercise the spiritual authority that Adam lost in the Garden of Eden. This understanding completely transforms the meaning of Christian discipleship. Following Jesus isn't just about personal moral improvement or preparation for heaven. It's about joining the cosmic battle against forces that have been corrupting humanity since before recorded history began. It's about learning to exercise supernatural authority that can bind demonic powers and release divine blessing. The disciples' commission to heal the sick, cast out demons, and proclaim the kingdom of heaven takes on new significance when understood within an Enochic framework. These weren't just temporary miraculous abilities given to first-century apostles. They were demonstrations of the spiritual authority that redeemed humanity is destined to exercise in the cosmic conflict. This authority doesn't come automatically with conversion or church membership. It requires the kind of spiritual development that Enoch himself underwent through walking with God and receiving direct divine revelation. It demands commitment to divine purposes that transcends personal comfort and social acceptability. The process involves learning to perceive spiritual realities that most people ignore or deny, developing sensitivity to angelic and demonic influences that shape human behavior, acquiring wisdom to distinguish between divine guidance and spiritual deception, building faith that can access supernatural power for cosmic purposes. This spiritual development can't be accomplished through conventional religious education alone. Seminary training that ignores apocalyptic literature and marginalizes supernatural reality doesn't prepare believers for cosmic spiritual warfare. Church programs focused on moral improvement and social fellowship don't develop the kind of spiritual authority that can bind demonic powers. Instead, the development requires serious engagement with suppressed spiritual knowledge, disciplined pursuit of direct divine encounter, and practical experience in spiritual warfare under the guidance of those who've already developed cosmic spiritual authority. This kind of spiritual mentoring has become increasingly rare in contemporary Christianity. The marginalization of apocalyptic spirituality eliminated most of the teaching traditions that could guide believers into cosmic spiritual practices. The emphasis on professional clergy created dependency on institutional authorities, who often lack the supernatural experience necessary for cosmic spiritual guidance. The result is that serious seekers of Enochic spirituality often find themselves without adequate human guidance, forced to rely on direct divine revelation and careful study of suppressed texts to navigate spiritual territories that institutional Christianity declared off limits. This situation creates both opportunities and dangers. The opportunity to develop direct relationship with divine wisdom that doesn't depend on human mediation. The danger of spiritual deception or imbalance that can result from attempting to engage cosmic forces without adequate preparation or community support. The Book of Enoch itself warns about these dangers while encouraging authentic spiritual seeking. The text reveals that the same divine wisdom available to Enoch remains accessible to contemporary believers, but it also shows that accessing this wisdom requires discernment that can distinguish between authentic divine revelation and demonic counterfeit. This discernment becomes particularly crucial when engaging with the apocalyptic dimensions of Enochic spirituality. The text contains detailed prophecies about end-time events that can inspire either healthy spiritual anticipation or unhealthy obsession with speculative timelines. The key is maintaining focus on present spiritual responsibilities while remaining aware of cosmic context. Understanding that current events have supernatural dimensions without becoming consumed by conspiracy theories. Expecting divine intervention without becoming passive about human responsibilities. This balance requires spiritual maturity that comes only through sustained engagement with cosmic realities under divine guidance. It's the difference between authentic prophetic insight and religious fanaticism, between healthy spiritual warfare and paranoid delusion, between cosmic hope and escapist fantasy. The Book of Enoch provides models for maintaining this balance through its portrayal of faithful believers who remained engaged with earthly responsibilities while maintaining cosmic perspective. Enoch himself didn't withdraw from human society when he began receiving divine revelations. Instead, he used his supernatural insights to serve divine purposes within human history. This integration of cosmic spirituality with earthly responsibility represents the mature expression of Enochic Christianity. Believers who understand their supernatural identity while remaining committed to natural human relationships. Spiritual warriors who engage demonic forces while maintaining practical effectiveness in daily life. The development of this integrated spirituality requires time, community, and divine guidance that goes beyond what most contemporary Christians experience. It demands engagement with suppressed spiritual knowledge, development of supernatural spiritual practices, and participation in cosmic spiritual warfare that institutional Christianity often seems designed to prevent. Yet for those willing to pay the price, the rewards extend far beyond personal spiritual fulfillment. They become agents of divine transformation in a world that desperately needs authentic spiritual leadership. They demonstrate possibilities that inspire others to seek their own cosmic spiritual development. They advance divine purposes that will ultimately triumph over all opposition. The Book of Enoch reminds us that this cosmic spiritual authority isn't reserved for exceptional individuals or future generations. It's available to any believer willing to pursue the kind of intimate relationship with God that Enoch himself experienced. The same divine power that translated ancient prophets to heaven can transform contemporary believers into agents of cosmic redemption. The question that remains is whether enough believers will embrace this cosmic calling to make a significant difference in the spiritual climate of our time. Whether the suppressed wisdom of Enochic Christianity can be recovered sufficiently to restore cosmic perspective to a church that has largely forgotten its supernatural heritage. The answer depends partly on individual believers who have the courage to explore spiritual territories that institutional Christianity declared dangerous. But it also depends on communities that can provide support and guidance for those undertaking cosmic spiritual development. And ultimately, it depends on divine intervention that can break through centuries of suppression to restore authentic cosmic spirituality to contemporary Christianity. The Book of Enoch suggests that such restoration is not only possible but inevitable. The cosmic conflict between good and evil is moving toward decisive resolution. The supernatural realities that were hidden are being revealed. The spiritual authority that was suppressed is being restored to those who seek it with genuine dedication. The time has come for you to make a choice that will determine not just your understanding of spiritual reality, but your very participation in the cosmic drama that has been unfolding since before human history began. Because what we've discovered tonight about the Book of Enoch isn't just ancient history or theological curiosity. It's a revelation that demands a response. You now know that one of the most influential texts in early Christianity was deliberately erased from your Bible. You understand that the cosmic worldview that shaped the apostles themselves was systematically suppressed by religious authorities who preferred institutional control over spiritual truth. You've seen how the supernatural dimensions of faith were edited out of mainstream Christianity, leaving believers with a domesticated religion that bears little resemblance to the cosmic warfare described in the New Testament. But knowledge without action is merely intellectual entertainment. The question isn't whether you find these revelations interesting or historically significant. The question is what you're going to do with them. Because the same forces that suppressed the Book of Enoch 16 centuries ago are still active today, still working to keep believers ignorant of their cosmic identity and supernatural authority. Think about how perfectly this suppression has worked. How many Christians today even know that the Book of Enoch exists, much less understand its massive influence on biblical thought? How many believers have been taught to think of spiritual warfare as purely metaphorical rather than literal conflict with supernatural intelligences? How many churches actively discourage the kind of mystical seeking that Enoch represents, preferring comfortable morality over cosmic transformation? The success of this campaign reveals the enormous power that religious institutions wield in shaping human consciousness. By controlling which texts believers could access, which ideas they could explore, which questions they could ask, the Church effectively determined how entire civilizations would understand the nature of reality itself. Yet here you are, in possession of knowledge that was considered too dangerous for ordinary believers to handle. You've glimpsed the cosmic drama that gives meaning to all human history. You've discovered that the spiritual warfare Paul describes in Ephesians isn't just beautiful poetry about personal temptation, but literal description of ongoing conflict between supernatural forces that actively shape world events. This knowledge comes with responsibility. You can't unknow what you've learned tonight. You can't return to the comfortable ignorance that characterizes most contemporary Christianity. You've crossed a threshold that separates those who are content with institutional religion from those who seek authentic spiritual reality. The path forward isn't easy or comfortable. Engaging seriously with Enochic Christianity means accepting that reality is far more dangerous, far more complex, and far more demanding than anything your religious education prepared you to handle. It means recognizing that every choice you make has cosmic significance, that supernatural forces are actively working to influence your decisions, that neutrality in spiritual warfare is impossible. but it also means discovering resources for spiritual transformation that institutional Christianity has largely forgotten. The same divine power that enabled Enoch to walk with God and receive cosmic revelations remains available to contemporary believers who pursue genuine spiritual intimacy. The supernatural authority that the apostles demonstrated in casting out demons and healing the sick wasn't limited to the first century. It's part of the spiritual inheritance that belongs to every believer willing to develop their cosmic identity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church stands as living proof that this cosmic Christianity can be preserved and practiced within institutional structures. Their maintenance of the Book of Enoch as canonical scripture allowed them to retain perspectives that other Christian traditions abandoned centuries ago. Ethiopian believers demonstrate that taking supernatural reality seriously doesn't require withdrawal from organized religion, but rather engagement with religious community that honors the full dimensions of spiritual truth. This model offers hope for the recovery of cosmic Christianity within contemporary church structures. But it also reveals how far Western Christianity has drifted from its apostolic foundations. The gap between Ethiopian Orthodox spirituality and typical American evangelical practice is so enormous that they barely seem like the same religion. Bridging this gap requires believers who are willing to pioneer the recovery of suppressed spiritual knowledge despite institutional resistance. It demands communities that can provide support and guidance for those undertaking cosmic spiritual development. It necessitates teachers who have themselves developed the kind of supernatural spiritual authority that can guide others into authentic Enochic Christianity. These resources are beginning to emerge as more believers discover the cosmic dimensions of their faith. Small groups studying suppressed texts like the Book of Enoch are forming in cities around the world. Online communities are connecting seekers who feel called to explore the supernatural territories that institutional Christianity declared off limits. Teachers with genuine spiritual authority are beginning to emerge from the margins to offer guidance for cosmic spiritual development, but the process is still in its early stages. The forces that originally suppressed Enochic Christianity remain active, working through both secular culture and institutional religion to prevent believers from discovering their cosmic identity. The entertainment industry continues to promote distorted versions of supernatural reality that make authentic spiritual warfare seem like fantasy. Academic theology remains committed to naturalistic assumptions that explain away the cosmic dimensions of biblical revelation. Most significantly, the comfort of conventional Christianity continues to seduce believers away from the challenging pursuit of cosmic spiritual development. It's easier to attend church services and participate in fellowship activities than to engage in the kind of serious spiritual discipline that develops supernatural authority. It's more socially acceptable to focus on moral improvement and charitable works than to claim direct divine revelation or exercise spiritual power over demonic forces. Yet for those who persist in pursuing authentic Enochic spirituality, the rewards are extraordinary. They discover that the promises made to ancient believers remain valid today. They learn that supernatural protection, divine wisdom, and spiritual authority are available to contemporary seekers who meet the conditions for receiving them. They experience the joy of participating consciously in cosmic purposes that transcend personal comfort and social approval. These experiences transform not just individual spiritual life, but entire communities that embrace cosmic Christianity. Churches that take spiritual warfare seriously become more effective at addressing the supernatural dimensions of social problems. Believers who understand their cosmic significance become more committed to divine purposes that require sacrifice and dedication. The transformation spreads through networks of relationships as people who've experienced authentic spiritual power share their insights with others who hunger for something more real than institutional religion typically provides. The cosmic Christianity that was suppressed begins to emerge from the underground, challenging the assumptions that have limited Christian effectiveness for centuries. This emergence isn't happening through official church channels or seminary curricula. It's happening through the same kind of grassroots spiritual seeking that characterized early Christianity before it became institutionalized. Ordinary believers are discovering extraordinary spiritual realities through direct encounter with suppressed texts like the Book of Enoch. The implications extend far beyond religious circles. As more people embrace cosmic worldviews that take supernatural reality seriously, the entire cultural conversation about the nature of existence begins to shift. The materialistic assumptions that have dominated Western thought for centuries are challenged by growing awareness of spiritual dimensions that can't be explained through purely naturalistic theories. This shift creates opportunities for presenting the gospel in ways that address the spiritual hunger that secular culture generates but cannot satisfy. People who've been told that the material world is all there is often respond eagerly to authentic demonstrations of supernatural reality. They recognize that cosmic Christianity offers answers to questions that materialistic worldviews can't even acknowledge. But seizing these opportunities requires believers who've developed genuine spiritual authority through engagement with the cosmic dimensions of their faith. It demands Christians who can demonstrate supernatural power rather than just talk about it, who can provide authentic spiritual leadership rather than mere moral instruction. This level of spiritual development can't be achieved through conventional religious education or casual church participation. It requires the kind of serious spiritual seeking that Enoch himself pursued, the willingness to separate from corrupt worldly systems in order to walk intimately with God. The Book of Enoch provides both inspiration and instruction for this journey. Its detailed descriptions of spiritual realities offer guidance for navigating supernatural territories that most contemporary believers never explore. Its promises of divine revelation and cosmic authority inspire hope that authentic spiritual transformation remains possible today. But engaging seriously with Enochic spirituality also requires discernment that can distinguish between authentic divine revelation and spiritual deception. The same supernatural realm that contains divine wisdom also harbors demonic counterfeits designed to mislead sincere seekers. The cosmic conflict between good and evil means that every step toward authentic spirituality provokes opposition from forces that prefer to keep humanity ignorant of spiritual truth. This opposition intensifies as believers develop genuine spiritual authority. The comfortable mediocrity that characterizes much contemporary Christianity doesn't threaten demonic powers, but believers who begin to exercise supernatural authority in binding evil spirits and releasing divine blessing quickly discover that spiritual warfare is more than metaphor. The attacks come through various channels designed to discourage cosmic spiritual development. Health problems that have no natural explanation. Relationship conflicts that seem to emerge from nowhere. Financial pressures that appear just as spiritual breakthrough seems imminent. Mental confusion that clouds spiritual discernment precisely when clarity is most needed. These challenges aren't signs that cosmic spirituality is dangerous or misguided. They're evidence that authentic spiritual development threatens forces that prefer to operate without interference. The intensity of opposition often indicates the significance of the spiritual territory being contested. Understanding this dynamic helps believers persist through difficulties that might otherwise discourage them from pursuing cosmic spiritual development. They recognize that challenges are part of the process rather than evidence that they're on the wrong path. They learn to interpret opposition as confirmation that their spiritual seeking is having real impact in supernatural realms. But persistence requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands the kind of faith that can access divine resources for overcoming supernatural opposition. The same divine power that protected Enoch during his cosmic journeys remains available to contemporary believers who learn how to access it through authentic spiritual practices. These practices go beyond conventional prayer and Bible study, to include the kind of intense spiritual discipline that develops supernatural spiritual faculties. Extended periods of fasting that break the hold of material concerns and open spiritual perception. Contemplative prayer that allows divine wisdom to penetrate consciousness clouded by worldly distractions. Intercession that engages directly with demonic powers that influence human affairs. The development of these practices requires guidance from those who've already traveled the path of cosmic spiritual development, but finding such guidance presents significant challenges in contemporary Christianity, where the cosmic dimensions of faith have been marginalized for centuries. This creates a situation where serious seekers often find themselves pioneering spiritual territories without adequate human support. They're forced to rely heavily on direct divine guidance and careful study of suppressed texts to navigate challenges that previous generations of believers faced with community support and experienced mentorship. The isolation can be overwhelming, especially when family members and church friends don't understand the spiritual journey being undertaken. The temptation is either to retreat into safer spiritual territory or to become so focused on cosmic realities that earthly relationships and responsibilities are neglected. The Book of Enoch itself provides guidance for maintaining balance between cosmic spiritual development and human relationships. Enoch didn't withdraw from society when he began receiving divine revelations. Instead, he used his supernatural insights to serve divine purposes within human history. He maintained his role as father and community member while developing intimate relationship with God that eventually resulted in his translation to heaven. This integration of cosmic spirituality with earthly responsibility represents the mature expression of Enochic Christianity. Believers who understand their supernatural identity while remaining committed to natural human relationships. Spiritual warriors who engage demonic forces while maintaining practical effectiveness in daily life. Achieving this integration requires wisdom that goes beyond what most contemporary spiritual education provides. It demands understanding of how cosmic spiritual realities interface with ordinary human experience. It necessitates discernment that can distinguish between divine guidance and personal preference, between supernatural leading and psychological projection. The development of this wisdom takes time and requires community with others who share similar spiritual commitments. Isolated individuals attempting to engage cosmic forces alone often become unbalanced or ineffective. The spiritual warfare described in Enoch is corporate as much as individual, requiring coordinated action by believers who understand their role in the larger cosmic drama. Finding such community represents one of the greatest challenges facing contemporary seekers of Enochic Christianity. Most churches are uncomfortable with the level of supernatural engagement that cosmic spirituality requires. Pastors trained in seminaries that marginalized apocalyptic literature often lack the theological framework necessary to guide believers into authentic spiritual warfare. Yet these communities are beginning to emerge as more believers discover the cosmic dimensions of their faith and seek fellowship with others who share similar spiritual hunger. They're forming through networks of relationship rather than institutional structures, connected by shared commitment to pursuing authentic spiritual reality rather than denominational loyalty or theological agreement. These emerging communities often demonstrate spiritual vitality that makes conventional Christianity seem spiritually impoverished by comparison. They expect supernatural manifestations of divine power rather than treating miracles as ancient history. They engage actively in spiritual warfare rather than limiting prayer to personal requests and general intercession. Most significantly, they maintain apocalyptic hope that transforms their understanding of current events and future possibilities. They don't see themselves as victims of historical forces beyond their control, but as conscious participants in cosmic drama that will culminate in divine victory over all opposition. This hope isn't based on naive optimism or denial of present difficulties. It's grounded in understanding of cosmic realities that the Book of Enoch reveals. The forces of evil may appear to be winning in the short term, but their ultimate defeat is certain. The righteous may suffer temporarily, but their vindication is guaranteed by divine decree. This cosmic perspective provides resources for hope and action that conventional Christianity often lacks. It explains why evil often prospers while righteousness suffers. It offers context for understanding persecution, spiritual attack, and apparent divine silence. It reminds believers that they're part of a story much larger than their individual circumstances. But embracing this cosmic perspective requires courage that goes beyond what most contemporary believers are prepared to demonstrate. It demands willingness to be misunderstood by family and friends who don't share cosmic worldviews. It necessitates commitment to spiritual practices that seem extreme to casual observers. It requires faith in supernatural realities that can't be verified through scientific methods. The price of cosmic spiritual development is high, but the alternatives are even more costly. Believers who remain content with conventional Christianity miss their cosmic calling and forfeit the supernatural authority that could make them effective agents of divine transformation. They settle for spiritual mediocrity when they could develop spiritual power that could change the world. The choice facing contemporary believers isn't whether to remain Christian or abandon faith entirely. It's whether to pursue the cosmic dimensions of Christianity that were suppressed centuries ago, or remain satisfied with the domesticated version that institutional religion typically provides. This choice will determine not just individual spiritual destiny, but the future of Christianity itself. If enough believers embrace the cosmic worldview that the Book of Enoch represents, it could restore supernatural dimensions to a faith that has largely forgotten its cosmic heritage. If they remain content with conventional approaches, Christianity will continue its decline into cultural irrelevance and spiritual impotence. The signs of this decline are visible throughout Western Christianity. Churches that once challenged social injustice now focus primarily on personal comfort and institutional survival. Believers who once expected supernatural intervention now explain away miracles as ancient mythology. Christian leaders who once spoke prophetically to political authorities now seek primarily to maintain their tax-exempt status and social acceptability. This isn't the Christianity that emerged from the cosmic worldview of the apostolic age. It's the domesticated religion that resulted from suppressing texts like the Book of Enoch, that preserved understanding of supernatural realities and cosmic purposes. The recovery of authentic Christianity requires engaging seriously with the suppressed dimensions of the faith, regardless of institutional resistance or social pressure. It demands believers who are willing to explore spiritual territories that conventional religion has declared dangerous or unnecessary. The Book of Enoch stands ready to guide this exploration for those who have courage to undertake it. Its cosmic revelations can restore understanding of the supernatural warfare that shapes human history. Its apocalyptic visions can renew hope in divine intervention that will ultimately triumph over all opposition. Its spiritual practices can develop supernatural authority that can transform individuals and communities. But the text can only fulfill its transformative potential for those who approach it with genuine spiritual hunger rather than mere intellectual curiosity. It rewards serious seekers who are willing to pay the price of cosmic spiritual development. It remains closed to casual readers who want information without transformation. The choice is yours. You can close this investigation satisfied that you've learned something interesting about Christian history and suppressed religious texts. You can file away this knowledge as fascinating but ultimately irrelevant to your actual spiritual life. You can return to the comfortable boundaries of conventional Christianity, grateful that others have preserved these cosmic insights, even if you're not ready to embrace them personally. Or you can recognize that discovering the Book of Enoch isn't coincidence but calling. You can understand that learning about suppressed cosmic Christianity is preparation for recovering it in your own spiritual life. You can embrace the possibility that you're meant to be part of the generation that restores supernatural dimensions to a faith that has forgotten its cosmic heritage. The forces that suppressed Enochic Christianity 16 centuries ago haven't disappeared. They're still working to keep believers ignorant of their cosmic identity and supernatural authority. They still prefer institutional religion that serves earthly power structures rather than challenging them with divine authority. But their suppression is no longer complete. The texts they tried to destroy have been recovered. The cosmic worldview they attempted to eliminate is being restored. The supernatural Christianity they feared is emerging from centuries of hiding to challenge their carefully constructed narratives. You have the opportunity to participate consciously in this recovery, rather than remaining a passive observer of spiritual transformation happening around you. You can join the growing community of believers who are reclaiming their cosmic inheritance. You can develop the supernatural spiritual authority that could make you an agent of divine transformation in a world that desperately needs authentic spiritual leadership. The Book of Enoch has emerged from 16 centuries of suppression to issue this invitation. The cosmic Christianity it represents is calling to believers who are no longer satisfied with institutional religion that has forgotten its supernatural heritage. The spiritual warfare it describes is seeking warriors who understand their cosmic identity and are willing to exercise supernatural authority for divine purposes. The question isn't whether you believe every detail of Enoch's visions or accept his text as infallible scripture. The question is whether you're ready to embrace the cosmic dimensions of faith that institutional Christianity has spent centuries trying to suppress. Whether you have courage to explore spiritual territories that conventional religion has declared off limits. Whether you're prepared to develop supernatural spiritual authority that could transform not just your personal spiritual life, but your effectiveness as an agent of divine transformation in the world. Because the Book of Enoch doesn't just reveal what was suppressed in the past. It points toward what could be recovered in the future. The cosmic Christianity it represents isn't just ancient history. It's present possibility for believers who are willing to pay the price of authentic spiritual development. The suppression failed. The truth survived. The cosmic dimensions of faith are being restored to a generation that desperately needs them. The only question that remains is whether you'll be part of this recovery, or remain content with the spiritually impoverished Christianity that resulted from centuries of systematic suppression. The choice is yours. The cosmic drama continues. Your participation is not just invited, but urgently needed. The forces of light are gathering for the final phase of the conflict that began when the Watchers first rebelled against divine authority. The question is which side you'll serve and how effectively you'll serve it. The Book of Enoch has spoken. The suppressed truth has been revealed. The cosmic call has been issued. Your response will determine not just your spiritual destiny, but your role in the supernatural drama that will soon reach its climactic conclusion. Choose wisely, choose courageously, choose with full understanding of what's at stake, because the cosmic conflict that Enoch witnessed isn't ancient history. It's present reality, and your choice matters more than you can possibly imagine.